Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
I'm Susan Coffin here for Attitude. You've probably been told that ADHD is just a discipline problem or maybe laziness or just an excuse for your bad parenting skills, or maybe even my personal favorite, not really a medical condition. After all, don't we all just have ADHD in the modern world? Today is the first day of ADHD Awareness Month, and Attitude is joined with the leading ADHD organizations in the United States, CHAD, the National ADD Advocacy Organization, ADA, the Adult Attention Deficit Disorder Association, and ACO, the Organization of ADHD Coaches, to launch a series of initiatives designed to spread the truth about ADHD and to help you guys rebut the myths. We're really asking everyone in the ADHD community to turn out and help us turn around these myths that we all live with that are so damaging to us and our children. To kick off today's ADHD Awareness Month, we're really honored today to have Dr. Michele Novotni as our guest. She is an internationally recognized expert in the field of ADHD, and she is not only the founder of the very first ADHD awareness event some 10 years ago, but also the chair of this year's coalition. She's an internationally recognized expert in the field of ADHD, the author of several books on the topic, a regular columnist for Attitude Magazine, I'm happy to say, a psychologist, a coach, and the parent of a young adult with ADHD. Michele's topic today is just precisely how do we explain ADHD to those around us, to our family, to our friends, to teachers, to workplace colleagues, and what is ADHD anyway? How should we all go about rebutting all these myths that we live with, especially the one that this is not a real or a treatable medical condition? So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Novotni. She'll give some initial remarks and then take some questions for the rest of the hour that we have. And thank you so much again, Michele, for being here today and for everything that you've done to advance awareness of attention deficit disorder.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, it's been a pleasure working with everybody in Awareness Month, so we're real excited. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit briefly about ADHD Awareness Month and how everyone can participate. This year in particular, we'd love to band people together. And if you're listening to this after October, it's still okay. You still can do awareness later. But if you're listening to it now, it's really important to pass on information about ADHD. Unfortunately, ADHD is one of the only conditions I know of that people still argue and disagree about whether it even exists. So not only do we have to work with the management of ADHD, which can be quite challenging, we have to work with proving that it's real all the time. So that's one of the purposes of the ADHD Coalition, is to join forces, and a number of other large mental health organizations have joined with us to, let's put that to rest once and for all. Because right now it's estimated that almost 85% of the adults don't even know they have ADHD. They might be wondering, they might be thinking. And this is especially true for women and the inattentive women because they don't look like the traditional rowdy guys with ADHD. So we'd like to change that. And there's way too many kids that still are not diagnosed yet, and there's still misdiagnosis. So we have a lot of educating to do to help promote awareness. Now, in terms of paying it forward, giving it back, I don't know about you, but when I was first confronted with my son Jared with ADHD, I knew he had it. I mean, he was jumping out of windows and doing all sorts of rowdy stuff, and he was getting kicked out of daycare center, so I wasn't confused as to whether he had it. But I was confused as to what his future would look like, what it was going to be like. No other parent totally got what I was going through. And I remember going to my first CHAD meeting, and a woman was talking about her rowdy child climbing out on a roof, and her family thinking what a bad parent she was because she didn't keep an eye on him close enough. And I just thought, I found my people. I finally found somebody who gets that I can have him under a watchful eye, and he can still escape and do something. So for me, that was really, really inspiring and hopeful to know that somebody somewhere has survived this too. There are other people that get what I'm talking about, and that they can help. And so I'm sure that for anyone that's been diagnosed or, thought they, probably have it or read some tips, somebody somewhere has helped you by sharing a tip, sharing a thought, sharing information. So I would love to encourage each and every one of you, especially in October, pass this information on. And we have some ways that we're suggesting to do it. And again, totally feel free to do it your own way too. But I'd love for you to check out the Coalition's website. It's ADHDawarenessmonth.org. Again, ADHDawarenessmonth.org. We're operating as a big tent for all the ADHD organizations, and we're posting all the different events that are happening, all the different free activities, resources. So again, there's tons of information, and each week we're coming up with ideas of what you can do this week to help promote ADHD awareness. We have screeners that you can send. Sending people screeners is a huge motivator to help people act. We have fact sheets that you can leave, and also the power of your personal story. When I did a lot of research on advocacy, it talked about the number one way to change stigma and fight stigma and change perceptions would actually be somebody's story somewhere. And each of you probably have a story. And sometimes it's not the first story that changes things. It might be the sixth story they hear that changes things. So as you feel comfortable, if you can share your story with someone, it says that they generally tend to pass it on to about 7 other people, and each of those 7 people tend to pass it on to 7 more people. So there really is a huge ripple effect when somebody values your opinion and says, yeah, I was diagnosed with ADHD, or yeah, I took the screener, and we talked to our doctor. That adds incredible credibility. The other thing you could do if you don't want to tell your story might be even just to stand up when someone says something faulty, like everybody has ADHD. And then you can just throw out figures like, well, no, 4.4% of the adults have ADHD. And again, we have all the exact facts, but if you let misinformation stand, it's almost the same as agreeing with it. So again, I'd like to just encourage you to do something this month's ADHD Awareness Month. And now I'd like to move on. And Susan, did you have anything else to add for what they could do to join with us on that?
No, I think that you've summed it up. I just want to reinforce what you said about going to ADHDawarenessmonth.org. You'll be astonished at the resources and the number of events that are being held all around the country. So get the word out.
Okay, and again, you can even have language. Like when somebody says something about ADHD that you don't agree with, you could say something nice like, given your experience, I could see how you might believe that. Let me share a different perspective with you. Or, I know the media tends to portray ADHD like this. However, I've lived with this each and every day of my life. Let me explain a little bit what it's like from my shoes. And again, you can find your own way, so you don't have to yell at them or punch them out, although sometimes I'm tempted to want to do that. I used to want to just give somebody Jared for a week when they thought that there was no such thing as ADHD. I think that would be a nice way to fight stigma. Maybe we should create a virtual ADHD kid to give people. Anyway, back to the robot. All right. In terms of talking about ADHD, it really helps if you talk about ADHD in terms of it being medical, brain-based, instead of behavioral. In the past, ADHD tended to be listed under behavioral disorders. And unfortunately with that tends to indicate that you can change it if you want to. And that's not exactly what's going on with ADHD. There's a fluctuating attention span, but it's not necessarily when you want it. So it would be good if you find language that you feel comfortable with. A lot of times, when I work with my clients, we talk about it being a brain-based disorder. And then the kids love it when I even talk about it's in your prefrontal cortex. And I show them like your forehead area and the front part of your brain. And I have little kids even tap in the front part of their brain. Yep, it's in the prefrontal cortex. That part's not working so great. And then they seem to feel better that it's just a difference in the way they're wired. So again, it's important to find language that expresses that. So brain-based works, Chad's terminology as a neurobiological condition. I've heard it referred to as a treatable medical condition. A brain-based executive functioning. So again, anything that seems to talk about the front part of your brain doesn't work the same as other people's. It's not a matter of will or choice. And the other thing that gets real confusing to people is that people with ADHD can often do things they enjoy better. And people think that that's them being selfish or that's their fault. But the science tells us that if you do something you enjoy, that actually lights up the under-aroused brain, which causes you to function better. So with ADHD, you almost do better to do the thing you enjoy doing first and then do the non-preferred activity second, which is the total opposite of what you would normally do. So again, get the facts right, get pictures of brains if you need them, but spread the word that this is a legitimate brain-based disorder, treatable medical condition, difference in brain wiring, whatever you want, but get that kind of picture together. Knowing how and when to tell others can be difficult. One, you have to be in the mood because you don't know exactly how others are going to take it. Sometimes I think something's going to be really easy and it ends up, being a lot of hoo-ha. Sometimes, depending on how much information you want to share, you're going to have a level of trust. So we're going to talk about a couple different settings and sort of some different ways to share information about ADHD in a way that makes sense in these different settings. So the first one is going to be in your child's school. Now, in schools, and this is really, 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 really important, teachers, for the most part, no longer tell you that they think your child may have ADHD. The schools, and many of the schools have decided ADHD is a medical condition, and the teachers are not supposedly equipped to share that information. Even the school psychologist will now no longer tell you they think your child has ADHD. What they do is they speak in code, and they'll tell you your child is very active. They'll tell you your child has a hard time paying attention. They'll tell you that their work is inconsistent. So they'll use all the ADHD symptoms, but they won't ever pull it together and tell you you should get your child checked out. They probably have ADHD. And I can't begin to tell you what a terrible disservice this is, because in the past, the school districts were one of the best allies for helping to identify some of the kids that they thought might have ADHD. And so in the past, the teachers might say, you might want to get it checked out. And again, I know there were misuses with that, and I know sometimes teachers just wanted you to get your kid medicated, whether or not it was ADHD. But for the most part, the teachers did an awesome job of helping parents know when it was time to go into the doctor and talk about ADHD. So now parents are waiting for the school, which they've done for years and years and years and years, to be flagging their kid. So I have people who say, no, nobody said my child has ADHD. And I said, well, let me see the report the teacher gave you, and it'll say everything but ADHD. It'll just knock off every single one of the symptoms. But because it didn't say ADHD, the parents don't go to get help. Also, the school psychology assessments, very detailed, 15 pages, all sorts of things in there. Again, they speak in code too. They don't ever say ADHD. They don't ever say, go get the child checked out. I'm not sure exactly why that is now, but it's just causing a lot of confusion. Also, if you go to get your child accommodations for ADHD, what you'll be told is that your child does not have a specific learning disability. What they're not saying is services for ADHD actually fall under 504 plans as other health impaired. How we got under other health impaired and what exactly that's supposed to mean, I don't know, but that's the language that people are talking about ADHD about in the school system. So if teachers are saying, your child might benefit from a 504 plan, they might be thinking ADHD, in code, of course. And if they're saying they don't qualify for a learning disability, they don't always tell you that they qualify as ADHD under other health impaired. So again, it's really important that you're going to have to be the one to bring up conversations and information. And even if you think my child has ADHD, should I get it checked out? The teachers are being trained to say it's up to you. That's between you and your doctor and things. So just because you don't get a positive response back from the teachers doesn't mean that your child doesn't have it Now, some teachers buck the system and they'll give you secret notes and say, please go get help. But for the most part, it's important for you to be the one initiating. So one of the good times to do that might be the upcoming teacher conferences, where you could say, if you're concerned, pick off the ADHD symptoms you're concerned about. Does Sally have a hard time focusing in class? Do you find her performance to be inconsistent? Is so-and-so more active than most other kids? So again, you can use that same language they're using to ask for information about your child. But if you flat out talk about ADHD when it's undiagnosed, they're not going to talk about it with you. On the other part, if your child has been diagnosed with ADHD, I strongly encourage you right from the get-go, talk to the teacher. And just say, hey, I know you're just starting the school year. I just wanted to give you a heads up, so-and-so has ADHD. Here's what we think the problems were. Here's what we're doing about it. If you see anything, please let me know right away. I'll be glad to help. So again, the earlier the better if it's already part of the issue. And if you don't know, you're going to have to be the one to bring up those conversations. So that's the really important twist on talking about ADHD in the school systems. Also, if your child's older, it's going to be important in the schools to include your child as early as possible in these conversations. Again, your child's going to be the one managing their ADHD for a long time. There's even debate now as to whether anybody actually outgrows it versus learning to manage it. But so the earlier your child can learn to take responsibility for ADHD, take responsibility for accommodations they may need, the better likelihood it is that they're going to be successful down the road. So start them off early. If they're too young, you feel, to be in the meetings, ask them ahead of time, hey, I'm going to go talk to your teacher. What do you think might be some good ideas that might help you pay attention? And again, as a psychologist who works with little guys, I've had wonderful success with sitting down with the kids saying, what do you think would help you pay attention better to that? And then I've had kids that say, I saw so-and-so, and they have this little postcard on their desk, and I see the teacher checking it off. I think that might help me too. Or they come up with brilliant ideas, or we come up with ideas. So again, as early as 6 and 7, they can be helping you come up with what might work. And I'd strongly encourage that, because by the time they get to college, parents are blocked pretty much from talking to the school and helping as much as we would like to. So that's that piece. Susan, any comments, questions, anything else on that?
Yeah, that's super helpful, Michele. There's some questions here further about school. I think people do have a hard time talking with the school. For example, here's a person who says that the school announces all the announcements in the morning, and her son can't remember the announcements, which is, of course, a classic, executive function dysfunction. And, how should she talk to the school about that and asking for a copy of the announcements? Is this something that has to wait for a diagnosis? When you have small problems like that could be easily remedied, how should parents approach the school?
I think you would start with doing it easy, because, again, once something becomes an official 504 plan, there have to be assessments, there have to be meetings, there have to be formal changes. So we actually, when I was working with Jared, and again, he was incredibly hyperactive, we made it all the way through middle school without something formal in place, just with teachers doing some informal things. And we actually formalized it because we knew once he went to college, he'd have to have accommodations in place in high school in order to access them for college. But many of the teachers will even do things like untimed tests. They'll let them come in later to do untimed tests, perhaps without an official 504 plan. But for something like the announcements, that could be something as easy as, hey, my child's a little stressed, he forgets the announcements. What would be the best way for me to access them? And it could be, and again, the more I think the parents take responsibility, or the child or individual takes responsibility to do something, the better. So like, instead of the onus being on the school office to email you copies of the announcements, maybe the parent could just ping the school, and you can even set it up automatically, but just, hey, can I get the announcements? And then they can just send it back. make it as easy as possible for them, but I would not wait to ask for something like that, and that's not unreasonable, and that's actually something pretty easy to solve. But again, the more they can take the onus of doing most of the work themselves, the more likely the school is to say yes.
This particular person has said that they have asked the school, and then this is coming up against, right up against the stigma. The school says it's reasonable. He should take responsibility. He should be able to take responsibility to remember himself what's been said.
Okay, so then it would depend on if they know the child has ADHD or not. Mm-hmm. Because in a normal situation, yes, they should be able to do that. And that's why ADHD is a disability. It's because even though it looks like something normal, for people with ADHD, it's difficult. So that's where you really need to come back with the ADHD issue. And some schools can be particularly challenging and difficult. Again, I've been an advocate for a number of people when they went to bat with their schools. And, I've had to fight for all sorts of things for people that are just incredibly reasonable. The other issue, too, is, and this isn't fair, but I've had a number of parents who have been fighting with school districts for over a year trying to get reasonable accommodations. And unfortunately, once they hire a professional advocate to go with them, the schools see my name or they see somebody else's name, and all of a sudden it's, oh, okay, yes, we can do that. And the parents just want to scream because they've been saying the exact same thing. So some schools are difficult, and if they can make you go away, they will.
Right.
Again, ADHD is an unfunded mandate in schools. It's one extra thing the teachers have to do. And some schools embrace the kids, and they really work with them on their strengths and do an amazing job. My husband was a teacher for 35 years. Sometimes it's not. So if it's difficult, then you might need to go the formal IEP route or the formal 504 route, where you can have that written in as one of the accommodations that he be given access to those announcements.
Okay. Someone has written in to say that they've been asked to come into school this Friday to meet with a teacher about behavior modifications. Is this a situation where, right from the get-go, they should take an advocate with them, or as a parent, what should they expect from being summoned to school, and how should they approach explaining their child's ADHD? It's not clear from this person's question whether the child's been diagnosed or not.
Well, actually, I'm encouraged that the teacher took initiative to start looking at the issue this early, so I think that's a good sign. And behavior management strategies and providing structure are one of the first strategies you're going to want to try to do anyhow. So that actually sounds good to me, that the teacher's not waiting until things get bad. If the child's been diagnosed with ADHD, I think that's a perfect time to share that information with the teacher. And if you want, you can even bring in one of the ADHD screeners, and there's a lot of screeners online. I think we're collecting a lot of them on our site, too. But you can bring a screener in and maybe ask the teacher to fill one out so that you can take that back to your doctor.
That's a really good idea. Yeah.
But I'm excited that a teacher is actually saying, hey, heads up, something's going on. But again, be prepared for that teacher to be speaking in code. They probably will not be saying the ADHD word. So be prepared for an attentive, difficult to pay attention, difficult to follow directions. So don't be hurt feelings about it. Be open to the possibility that the teacher may be trying to help, say, hey, I think your kid might have something bigger going on. And they won't tell you to go talk to your doctor, but if that's what's going on, I would suggest you go talk to your doctor or get a psychologist or, to start working with you. And again, let's catch it early, because undiagnosed ADHD for a long time causes, difficulties with self-esteem, and there's all sorts of negative consequences of not picking it up. So the earlier you can catch it, the better. So I'm thinking kudos to the teacher for raising the flag up.
That's great. Okay. Here's a question, an interesting question. This person's child is in third grade and has a diagnosis and is getting accommodation, so all's well. However, the other students are starting to notice, and he's starting to feel self-conscious, and that stigma effect, which we all live with, is raising its head. How do you explain to kids, to other kids, or other kids' parents, so that there's not resentment. So, it's not, oh, this kid's getting an unnecessary advantage, that whole concept that ADHD is just an excuse.
Yeah, so that's a combination between what we were just talking about and sort of explaining it to others. The best example I think I've come up with over the years for explaining it to others would be, if you had 3 kids, or say you have a whole class and one kid breaks their arm and wears a cast, is being fair having everybody in the whole class wear a cast on their right arm for 6 weeks? And then they'd all go, no. And it's like, each of you is probably going to come up with something that you're going to need for the way that your brain works or the way you have strengths. When the time comes, you're going to get what you need, just like so-and-so's getting what they need. And kids actually have less stigma about ADHD than I think the older generations. So a lot of the kids will just say, it's ADHD, I've got ADHD, or that's just the way my brain works. No big deal.
Right.
So I think if you sort of normalize it, but, again, whether it's a child in a family or a child in a classroom or a child in a school or a church or a synagogue or whatever, I think just talking about fair doesn't mean equal. And that's the misperception that everybody has. And, by using an example like a broken right arm, everybody's like, yeah, no, we wouldn't want that.
Right.
So I think if you normalize it, that should help.
Normalizing is a really good idea. That's the key to so many differences, dealing with so many differences. Before we leave the school topic, because we do have some adults who have some questions, how there are a number of folks here whose children have been diagnosed with ADHD and yet are having a difficult time with the school putting in place 504 IEPs. And guess what they're asking is, what are the best resources? Where should they go to get back up?
I would, if you've tried reasonable accommodations and the school's difficult, and again, some schools are very difficult, they might want to contact some of the people from their local CHAD groups. Because the local CHAD groups would probably know, have some resources available in that specific community. But in general, I just find it, and I found it incredibly useful to get an advocate, whether it's, and sometimes it might be the school counselor, although a lot of the school counselors don't like to go to bat against the school district.
Right.
So often you need to bring in somebody from the outside. It can even be another knowledgeable parent, or again, if you have the means to hire an ADHD psychologist or a professional advocate. As I said, a lot of times I don't even have to go to the meetings. They just use my letterhead saying I'm coming, and I don't go, and they get everything they want.
Wow.
But again, I've already screened them to make sure they're reasonable and appropriate. I might have to start charging for my letterhead, the note on it. I'll be coming to the meeting. But that's really all it's taken. I can't tell you how many times, is just them knowing that I'm coming. And so it probably wouldn't be incredibly cost prohibitive for people. And again, I know there's parents that have been around the block a number of times, because the school will say, well, we can't offer that. And I know they can. And I just look at them in the meetings and I go, really? And then they go, well, I guess we could. And so if you know what the rules are, and then sometimes I've had parents, like I had one parent who wanted, I forget what it was outrageous. And the school district gave them every single thing that the child needed. And then the parent wanted these 2 outrageous things. And the parent was getting mad. I actually had to call the parent out of the meeting
Wow.
and say,
calm
please,
down.
It's like, please stop. The school district has just given you more than they were required to give you. Your child has what they need. This is not reasonable. It's not necessary. Please stop and be very grateful, because they just gave you these 3 things they weren't even required to. And
right.
So here, not knowing what they needed, I think any parent is like a mama bear, with their kid. They just want to make sure they get what they're supposed to get.
Right.
But yes, I actually had to call down parents at a meeting.
That's interesting. I just wanted to, you mentioned the CHAD support groups. In case there are people on this webcast who don't know CHAD, CHAD's a wonderful national advocacy organization that has chapters around the country that hold support groups meetings. It's chadd.org. and go to their site and look for a chapter or support group near you, and that's a great way to find support, meet other families, and talk about how they handle their school or their whatever. Turning to adults, there are plenty of other questions here about how to explain ADHD to children and to children's friends, but let's go back to the adults here. Interesting question from an attorney who says he has really taken on the task of making his state bar association, maybe it's a she actually, this attorney, male or female, has taken on the task of making the State Bar Association aware that there are attorneys out there with ADHD. And interestingly, state bar associations tend to have lawyer assistance programs for depression, for substance abuse, for stress, for anxiety. But in her case, they seem to see ADHD as a lazy quote or a character flaw. She's forwarded the ADHD Awareness Month link to her State Bar Association Lawyer Assistance Program. Any other thoughts? Let me just throw in here one note. We have a wonderful article by Sandy Maynard, who's a coach, on the AttitudeMag.com website. I'll find the link and post it. But it's a first-person story by an attorney with very granular description of his career as an attorney and how it was affected by having attention deficit disorder, how he got treated, and how he improved as an attorney. So I'll find that. That might be something helpful. But Michele, do you have any other thoughts for a professional situation and attention deficit?
Well, again, we have many frontiers where that's true, which is why we have to do this awareness month and why we have to fight and why we have to put out information. So this is just one more place where it needs to happen. So I love the fact that she's taken some initiatives, and it could be providing more education for them so that they really understand this is legitimate, these are reasonable accommodations. And there are others who have gone before her. I'm thinking like Rob Tedisco, and I'm thinking there's material by like the Lathams that have written things who are attorneys, and Matt Cohen was an attorney who wrote a lot of stuff. So again, there are people who are out there. So I think find the people that are already going down that path, and sort of like we all did, joining together to have one voice. Find the others and band together and see what you can do to help change perceptions. And it might be involve some of the national organizations to also write a letter, supporting. Again, there are many, many frontiers, but her sharing her story is awesome. Her taking initiative is awesome. And again, she might be the one that gets knocked down, but if she keeps standing up, what is it, the Chinese quote, you fall down 7 times, rise 8,
right.
And then help others around her, eventually they're going to say, oh, so it really is something in the prefrontal cortex. Oh, it really is a brain difference. Oh, that genetic code that they identified where the gene is, that's like telling somebody with glasses to try to see harder, and I'll give you a star on your chart if you see harder.
Right.
One day,
this attorney might also want to download the facts about ADHD fact sheet from ADHDawarenessmonth.org and send that on, forward that through email. It's very scientific information, very carefully footnoted, stating the facts that ADHD is a real medical disorder and the facts about it. It's really well done. It's a document that was really put together so that to give ammunition to people just like someone in your situation who's trying to win over a doubter. So
that's a really great idea, Susan. And actually, you forgot to mention the National Resource Center when you listed all the coalition members, because they did.
Yeah.
I got to give them a shout out because they referenced that sheet that Ada had put together. So again, there are some really nice, carefully annotated, scientific, research-based journals. So I think the lawyers will be happy with those fact sheets. I'm glad you remembered those. And again, anybody who doubts it's existent, check it out.
I think having that information be very factual and scientific is key, because we are dealing with an atmosphere in which, doubt is pervasive. So we need the science and the studies to support what we're saying. And it is there on those fact sheets on ADHDawarenessmonth.org.
Can I move on to the timing tips for telling your relatives, coworkers, and bosses?
Yes, because I've got those questions in spades. My spouse was diagnosed with ADHD. His sister, who was a teacher, quote, doesn't believe in ADHD. And this person's spouse doesn't want to tell his mother because he feels she'll react the same way. And
right, and then
it's really isolating not to be able to talk to your own family about this.
Right, and then we also have the last slide too was going to be talking about your kids, how to help them understand it too.
Yeah, and that's another question that's here. How do I tell my child what's going on with him so he'll feel better?
Actually, let me do that one first and then go into the other one because I think the other one's going to take up all the rest of the time. But the tips for ADHD to your son or daughter. Here again, I want to go back to what I said the first time is that to really have that medically accurate picture of ADHD. And again, I work with people from 3 years old up to 83 years old, trying to talk about ADHD. But the essence is always about your brain works differently. And I love Ned Hollowell's example of a race car brain for the hyperactive ADHD people. And, he just talks about, you've got a hyperactive, you've got a race car brain and but you're driving around the neighborhood. And so sometimes that's a problem. And again, the kids really seem to like that. It's so, how are we going to slow down your brain? Because some of your brakes aren't working all great at times. And again, explaining that it's to the prefrontal cortex. And there are some really nice videos online that show the brain, that show the part of the brain involved in ADHD. I've even shown little kids pictures of the neurotransmitters not making the messages go across. So again, I think the more we can pull in science to show your brain works differently, and then quickly follow that up with, so once you learn how to use your brain best, some amazing things can happen because other parts of your brain are going to work great. And I always share, I'm really, really, really bad at mechanical things. I'm actually in the bottom 5% of the country for mechanical aptitude. And usually in the office, I can't even change the paper in the Xerox machine. But I'm try. It's not good. So fortunately, I don't have to do mechanical things very often in my life. And that's fine because I'm better at other things. And so when you share something that you're not good with, and again, every parent is probably not good at something, and say, how it's hard for me to do X, so it's going to be hard for you to be doing some of these executive functioning things. But I bet you're probably better at things like color. You're probably better at ideas. You're probably better singing. And again, highlight their strengths. Because with ADHD, yes, there are things that need to be managed. That's why it's a disability. And yes, there are going to be individual strengths that each and every person has so that ADHD is manageable. So when you're talking about it being brain-based, talk about some of the potential, talk about it being manageable. It's really important that you instill hope that this is a treatable medical condition. It's okay. It's different. It's the way you're wired. I actually tell people that every group, whether it's a workplace group or a school group, should have at least one individual with ADHD in it to help things expand. I love the whole out-of-the-box thinking. I also think they ought to have one detail linear person to make sure that the details get followed through with. But again, I think we need all kinds of brains. Also, I found it really helpful in telling kids about ADHD or individuals to pull out some of the lists of some of the successful people who have had ADHD, and so that they can see it. I had one girl who's like, how many women have ADHD? Who are some of the famous women? And there's some nice posters online with, famous people with ADHD or suspected ADHD. For the hyperactive types, they also like the hunter-farmer language of Tom Hartman. Where they talk about the hunters were the ones that ran around and killed the game and, brought in food, and the farmers planted the seed and watched it grow. The kids sort of like that one, and so do the adults. So again, I think we need to find some way when you're talking about your child's ADHD, or even when you're talking to an adult about their ADHD, it's a difference in the way your brain's wired. That part of your brain has some trouble right now, so we're going to try to see, one, how we can restore it to more normal functioning, whether that's through medication management, whether that's through physiological behavioral interventions. That's what we're working with. but they also need to understand that it's not a death sentence. It's something that you have to manage, and it can be managed. And that's the message that I think is really important to share.
That's a great answer. I've always found it helpful to use books. There's some great kids' books out there explaining ADHD and talking about other kids. Just again, part of the normalization process, I think.
Absolutely. Usually the ones I used were like Shelley the Hyperactive Turtle, A Walk in the Rain with Your Brain that Ned Hollowell did, and then I love Eagle Eyes, where the kid with the ADHD ends up being the hero and saving the dad. So absolutely, sharing those kind of stories with books. Also, some of the physician offices have booklets written for kids. I worked on one of those projects recently where there's books for kids and teens and adults explaining ADHD, in language that hopefully they can understand. So again, your physician or your psychologist might also have some resources of some booklets. We found sometimes books are a little long for people with ADHD, so booklets, might be an option too. So absolutely. Great idea, Susan. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. So
moving on. Family, yeah.
Family, relatives, coworkers, perhaps the boss. Let me pick off the boss first because that's easy. Many people choose not to disclose ADHD in the workplace because they're afraid of the perception. So my thinking on that is if your ADHD can be invisible in the workplace, there's probably no reason to bring it up. So if your ADHD is managed with your strategy, structure, supports, medication, coaching, if you've got it pretty managed, I don't see any advantage to bringing it up. And again, with today's workplace being as critical as it is and with some of the stigma, it could be a negative. If your ADHD is visible and you need accommodations, there are not 504 plans in the workplace yet. I don't know that we can't have them in the future, but the HR companies can do some things to help accommodate ADHD that are reasonable. So the trick with ADHD in the workplace would be to first try asking for it without naming it ADHD. So you could say, when I'm working on this project, is it okay if I just go upstairs in an empty conference room for a bit? I'm finding it difficult to do whatever. Or I'd like to bring my headset into the office because working in this cube is making me crazy, trying to block out all the noise. So again, I think you can talk about what problem you're having and bring in the solution. What I'd like to try to do about it is. So say again at a meeting, you have a hard time catching all the important points, just like the little kid who couldn't get the messages, the morning messages. Some of the adults miss things in meetings. So again, by taking the onus, what you might want to do is send a quick email following up. Okay, so the following are my action items from our meeting. And then if you miss something, somebody will say, yeah, but you also said this. So again, instead of asking somebody to type up meeting notes for you, if you say, let me just run this by you, or if you don't want to type them up, just, have them written down, grab a buddy and say, hey, I just want to check and make sure I captured all the key points. Most businesses are now realizing that they do better if somebody takes notes and somebody says out action items. But again, if they don't, see if you can do it on your own without naming it ADHD. And if for some reason you need an accommodation for ADHD, like many of the people in schools do, then you're going to need to involve your HR department. The HR department will actually not even tell your boss that it's ADHD. They'll just say that so-and-so requires this. And they won't even say that you have ADHD, or if you're depressed, they won't say you're depressed. So the HR department is very confidential about not calling it ADHD. But obviously, if the HR department's saying you need this and this and this to pay attention to details, I think people will put it together. So again, I think it's the same principle as you work within the school systems to try to do it informally if that works. And if not, the HR departments are required under the Americans with Disabilities to provide accommodations for ADHD. But what I usually have found, too, is if you have to fight for accommodations, whether it's in the school or whether it's in the workplace, sometimes there's a better match for you someplace. It might be a better teacher match. It might be a better work situation. So again, you have the rights to fight, but I know in talking to some of the attorneys, it's long, it's hard and difficult and not always, ends up well. So I think try to take responsibility to do as much as you can. And if you're in a position, and I have a number of execs and presidents of companies and things that I coach, and a lot of them are very open about their ADHD, and that's really nice. So if you're in a position where you can be a role model for others and sort of come out of the closet with ADHD, and not be in fear of jeopardizing your job, that is wonderful. So again, depending on how secure you are in your job, that might be great to share that.
Let me just back up 1 second. I think your point about, there's no real need to share a diagnosis in the workplace unless you absolutely have to try to find your way. Some of the folks on the webinar have taken a similar approach toward their relatives and even the school. They're saying, we haven't told anyone besides the teacher and the doctor. We just feel our child will be treated badly. We're not even telling grandparents. Is there a reason to go ahead and tell people other than what you said about just coming out there and helping diffuse stigma? But is there a problem with being quiet about this diagnosis, in your view, for the family or the child?
Well, there's a couple problems with it. One is if it's a secret, it's almost like it's something shameful. And a lot of the kids are ashamed of having ADHD because even though the parents might be saying it's okay, but don't tell anybody.
Right.
Now it's sort of like, well, how okay is it if I can't tell anybody? So I think that shame factor is part of it. And so I think a lot of the families that don't tell anybody at all are really living under that cloud of shame. And they also are living alone. If you're not reaching out to others and if others aren't part of your team, because it does take a village to work with a kid with ADHD.
Right. I think that makes
even
sense.
some of the with ADHD are still taking a village. And so, again, I think it's almost like putting yourself in solitary confinement. Now, the one challenge you run into with your relatives would be that ADHD does run in families, and therefore any of the people in your family may have ADHD. And one of the things you bump into in family systems are, I was just like that when I was a kid and I'm fine. I was just like that and look how good I turned out. So by you naming ADHD, they might feel like they're being attacked.
Right.
And so sometimes you're not going to be able to change everybody's perception. And you can just sort of say, and you did amazing with that. However, the world's a little different for Tom now.
Right.
And so, again, you might actually bump into more resistance with relatives because that's been their walk, too. And especially if he's chosen, no medication no matter what, and they've homeschooled their kids, they might be holding that out as your image.
Right.
So, again,
it's so interesting that you say this because there's actually a very poignant post here from someone who says, how do I tell the father of my sons, both of whom have been diagnosed, that he should look into it for himself? We've parted ways because his behavior is impossible to live with, and we're all brokenhearted. It's very sad, really.
It is, and actually, maybe Awareness Month's a good time to, pass them on some of the, pass them a screener.
Right.
An adult ADHD screener. And, and maybe if you send it to everybody in your listserv just as a general blast, they might not see it as a personal kind of thing. But again, if your child has ADHD, there's a good likelihood that one of you or at least one of your parents probably has it too.
Right.
And so I think it's important to share, it's sort of like friends don't let friends drive drunk. Maybe family let family go undiagnosed with ADHD. I had one guy, it was funny, he came in and he had a lot of ADHD. And so he said, I've got some siblings and I think they probably do too. So over the next month, I think I diagnosed 7 people in that family with ADHD. And they all kept talking about this other guy who wasn't coming in their family. And they're like, I know I have a lot, but you should say John. And so John never came in, but one day I was at a light store, and they called out my name, and, like Michele Novotni. And so this guy and this light store came up to me and said, "Hey, you Dr. Novotni?" I went, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm John."
That you've been hearing so much about, right? That's funny.
It's like, I've been waiting for you. And he's like, "I'm not coming." I said, "That's your choice." I said, "If you're ever ready, come and see me." I said, "There's a really good likelihood you're one of the bunch." But again, everybody's ready. So again, I think passing on information, and here again, fact sheets are really helpful, credible information, brochures, articles. So I think the more you can educate people, and you don't have to educate them about absolutely everything, but I think if you educate them, especially about the way your ADHD might impact others or other people, like your child's hyperactivity might be a problem. It's like I would love to go to the church's concert on Sunday that's 3 hours. However, I know my child won't be able to stay still for that long because of the ADHD. What I'd like to do instead, and again, give them an option, is I'd like to enjoy, the brunch afterwards with you guys where, I think that would be more comfortable for us. So instead of just saying, "No, I won't come to it," it's like, this will be a challenge for us. Therefore, here's what I'd like to do instead. Or if your child's on medication and the medication runs out at night, that's really important for people to know because, if they're planning on taking somebody out for dinner, and your child doesn't eat because they're on medication. So again, I think there's things that people really do need to know. And, not everybody's going to be enthusiastic. But again, if your friends or relatives aren't going to be comfortable with even talking about ADHD, I don't know how good an environment that's going to be for you or your children to be functioning in on a really regular basis.
There's a question here about whether to tell sports team coaches and babysitters, and I think I know your answer. Yes, most likely.
I think get a heads up because, again, if your kid is all wiggly and squiggly, ADHD characteristics tend to be portrayed as a moral disorder. So if they don't have,
right?
They're just bad. They're disrespectful. They don't. So again, if ADHD were called nothing, that would be different. But people tend to attribute moral attributes to ADHD in the absence of a diagnosis. So again, if ADHD is going to be visible, which in most cases it is, they're going to say something, like even if it's the inattentive ADHD, they're going to say they were just off daydreaming, they weren't paying attention, they didn't think what I had to say was important. But if they know if so-and-so has ADHD, if they look like they're not paying attention, it tends to help to, walk by them and just sort of tap them on the shoulder a little bit or, whatever. But I think it's helpful to tell people so they don't misattribute it to them being bad.
Right, absolutely. I will post, we have a wonderful booklet written by Ellen Kingsley, who was the founder of Attitude, it's called The ADHD Guide to Babies for Babysitters, and it's super helpful how to explain to your babysitter, and it's helpful for other things as well, how to help your child. So I'll post a link to that, and I really recommend it. It's a free download on the Attitude site. Michele, we only have a few minutes left. There are a number of questions here that relate directly to rebutting myths that maybe I thought maybe we could tackle those in a few remaining minutes. So one person says, "I'm a 52-year-old adult, but I've often heard it said that children outgrow their ADHD. How can that be if it's brain-based?"
Oh, okay. Way back in the 90s, people said adults didn't have ADHD. It was a childhood disorder. By 15, you outgrew it. I wrote one of the first 3 books on adult ADHD, and I became president of the Adult Attention Deficit Disorder Association because back in the day, they thought that everybody outgrew it. So the current thinking is that many people outgrow it. However, in my experience, I've never seen an awful lot of people with ADHD over my career. I've never yet seen somebody where it's gone. I've seen people who have learned to manage it. I've seen people who were running out of the hall and jumping out windows, tap their fingers and move around in their seat. I think where science is going to be that nobody actually outgrows it. I think the symptoms decrease. I think we learn to manage it better. I think it changes format as we get older and more mature. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 years, we don't find out that nobody outgrows it. We just learn to manage it. I know the National Institute of Mental Health has been working for probably 15 years on the genetics involved with ADHD and trying to see who outgrows it and how is that code different or what's different and is there a way to replicate it without success so far. And then, again, I love the work that they're doing. We even had our whole family participated. We got other people involved. I'm not sure anybody outgrows it, and I think that's probably one of the things that might be a disservice to our community because I think the doctors offer hope for everybody. Oh, your child has ADHD, but they'll probably outgrow it. That's not really accurate. Everybody seems to be still managing it every day. I had a client who told me my job that is ADHD. On top of my job is my job.
Right. Here's another question. Is it true that ADHD children are brighter than other children?
I'd love to say yes, but nope.
Just regular kids, right?
Actually, ADHD cuts across everything, race, intelligence levels. I think some of the more intelligent people might have parents that are more intelligent that have funds to go get their kids diagnosed and treated. Mm-hmm. But no, when I even used to work with clients with mental retardation a long time ago, and I was looking at them, and I thought they had ADHD, and everybody's like, no, they can't have ADHD, and they did. So, no, I think everybody can have ADHD. It's a non-discriminatory disorder.
Right. And maybe one of the myths is actually that, you can't be bright and bright people can't have ADHD, which we know is not necessarily true at all. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as we're wrapping up, is there any last item that you'd love to say, Michele, as we close? This has been a great session.
Just like to say Happy ADHD Awareness Month. And again, I'd like to encourage people to go to ADHDawarenessmonth.org, get fact sheets, get information, and please, this month, join the movement. Help spread the word. Just all the questions that are coming up show how much work still needs to be done. And I think if everybody does something to help promote ADHD awareness and dispel some of the myths and the misfactual information, what an impact we can have. Our work is definitely not done yet.
Okay, thank you, Michele, and thank you, everyone. And goodbye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit AttitudeMag.com. That's AdditudeMag.com.